Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's CGIC National CPD webinar, Beyond ESG Compliance: The Future of Risk, Governance, and Value Creation in the Age of AI. My name is Brock Olive, and I am the Director of Education with the Chartered Governance Institute of Canada. I thank you very much for joining us today. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that CGIC is exploring the development of a micro-credential that would dive deeper into today's topic, along with other emerging governance issues. At the end of the webinar today, a short survey will automatically appear in your browser. We'd greatly appreciate you taking a few minutes to complete it, as your feedback will help shape our future professional development offerings. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Chafika Eddine. Chafika is a governance, sustainability, and risk management professional with more than 25 years of international experience advising boards and executive teams on governance, ESG, enterprise risk, and operational resilience. She currently serves on corporate boards, is a fellow of the Chartered Governance Institute of Canada, and is currently completing her Doctor of Business Administration at Royal Roads University, where her research focuses on governance frameworks that strengthen enterprise value and resilience. Chafika, thank you for being with us today. I'll hand the mic over to you.
Thanks, Brock. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for attending this webinar, and thanks to the Chartered Governance Institute of Canada for the opportunity to share some thoughts and hopefully spark some interesting discussions. This webinar was designed for board directors, C-suite executives, and I know some of you who are not there yet aspire to reach those positions in future. And today I would like to explore what the future of ESG may look like in the age of AI, and why governance, risk, resilience, and trust may become more important, not less. During the session, I'll share some practical examples of both risks and opportunities and how AI can impact the future of ESG. Please share your thoughts and questions in the chat. A quick view on board responsibilities, as they must ensure appropriate corporate governance, and they hire the CEO to drive the organization. And here's where governance matters the most. Boards, they don't manage ESG, they oversee value creation. And more, they will ask executives the hard questions about ESG and AI governance. Ethics, cybersecurity, human oversight, data quality. Board will be asking the executives who is accountable and how AI is being applied and managed. With the board being responsible to drive the corporate governance and risk management, they set the tone from the top for the direction and the strategic planning. The board sets direction, the C-suite executes. The board responds to the owners of the companies. They must ensure management has clear vision of what and who affect or can be affected by the operations, and have the controls to mitigate and eliminate risks. If your organization wants to grow, especially internationally, governance sophistication becomes a competitive filter. I can give you a simple example of how ESG due diligence now plays a relevant role in cross-border transactions. A few years ago, a major mining company decided to divest one of its operations. After the initial review, 3 companies were shortlisted to acquire it, and they were invited to visit the operation, meet the management team, and provide additional information about their ESG performance and practices. And in the end, the company chosen to acquire the asset was the one that the local management team trusted the most. And that was because of their strong reputation, governance practice, and track record of working well with stakeholders. This shows an important point. Today, due diligence is no longer only technical or financial. Governance quality, reputation, and relationships with stakeholders increasingly influence who becomes the preferred partner. When ESG and AI are discussed at board level, the first question that frequently comes up is, why should boards care? And for boards, the answer is straightforward. When ESG and AI impact the drivers of enterprise value or influence risk, capital, talent, growth, and intelligence, they do matter. Organizations that identify issues early, they tend to be more resilient. It begins with governance. Good governance builds trust, and trust in turn attracts capital and talent, two of the most critical inputs for any organizations that wants to grow and be resilient. And when organizations have access to capital and talent, they're far better positioned to expand, to innovate, and to compete over the long term. Investors, regulators, partners, they begin to ask fundamental questions. Is this organization well managed? Is it predictable and transparent? Does it understand and manage well its risks? Is it resilient under pressure? And organizations that can answer those questions with confidence, they send a powerful signal to the market. They are seen as a trusted partner for governments and society and a credible destination for investment. So why this matters now? And, we are hearing a lot about artificial intelligence, about climate change, geopolitics challenge, supply chains. And most of the time, these topics are discussed separately. But boards and executives, they don't manage issues in silos. They oversee organizations, and all these issues are connected. A climate event can disrupt operations and increase insurance costs, for example. A geopolitical conflict can affect energy prices, supply chains, and inflation. A loss of trust can stop a project, and even if all the permits are in place, it still can damage an organization. And AI is changing how organizations identify risks, making decisions, create value. And this matters because all these things eventually show up in the same place, which is enterprise value. They can affect access to capital and talent. They can increase costs, damage reputation, and impact operations and growth. Take the mining industry, for example. A couple of years ago, a Canadian mine had to suspend operations because of nearby wildfires. And the issue wasn't the operation at all. It was just the broader environment around it. You're going to hear me mentioning most of my examples around the mining industry, which is where I have most of my experience focused to. You might also have heard that mining has been suspended in Panama for the past 3 years, and a world-class copper mine with all the necessary permits in place ended up closing, not because of technical failure, but because it lost public confidence. And if we look at what's happening today with geopolitical tensions, rising fuel prices affecting transportation, travel, supply chains, inflation, and ultimately the cost of doing business. And now, when we add AI to the picture, AI is no longer just helping us finding information. It's starting to monitor, recommend, and even act. And that creates enormous opportunities, but also new governance questions around ethics, cybersecurity, accountability, and human oversight. This is why I believe governance is becoming more important, not less. Boards and executives are being asked to oversee a much broader range of interconnected risks and opportunities than ever before. And investors are paying much closer attention to ESG and AI risks when they decide how expensive it will be for a company to access capital. When we talk about ESG, I think it's helpful to remember that this isn't really something new. What changes over time is how we think about responsibility and risk. If we go back a few decades, organizations were mainly focused on productivity and efficiency. Then safety became a priority, and if we are honest, it took many accidents before organizations stopped reacting to incidents and started building a real safety culture. And then came the environment, and as we learned more about our impacts, regulations evolved and companies introduced better systems to manage them. After that, the conversation expanded to people, communities, trust, and social impact. And today we are entering another chapter, the artificial intelligence. And AI can process information faster than we can. It can identify patterns, summarize data, and even recommend actions. But it can't replace judgment. It can't replace trust. It can't build relationships. And I actually think AI will make people even more important. So just as safety evolved from a compliance exercise into part of the organization's culture, I think AI and ESG are going through a similar evolution. And for me, the future isn't human versus AI, it's human plus AI. People often compare AI to previous technological revolutions, and I think this one is a little different. It's not just changing how we work, it's starting to change how organizations make decisions. Most of us are already familiar with the generative AI, which help us write, summarize information, and answer questions. And now we are seeing the next step, agentic AI. Instead of simply giving us information, it can monitor, recommend, and in some cases, even take action. So we are moving from reporting to intelligence, and now in some situations to action. And that creates exciting opportunities, but it also raises some important governance questions. Who is accountable? What decisions should always remain human? Where do we draw the line? I believe AI will help us make better decisions. And agentic AI may help us execute some of those decisions more efficiently. But judgment, ethics, trust, and accountability, those are still human responsibilities. Here's a concept that's becoming more popular in governance and sustainability discussions, which is the net positive mindset. And this is a governance choice. In simple terms, it means aiming to ensure that our activities leave ecosystems, communities, and stakeholders better off than they were before the activity began. And this shifts the conversation from simply reducing harm or managing impacts to ask more ambitious questions. How do we leave people and the environment better than we found them? And how do we create value that lasts? For organizations and boards, this mindset encourages decisions that look beyond compliance or mitigation and instead focus on long-term stewardship, resilience, and shared value creation. There's no standardized solution, but I consistently see several themes: clear governance, shared purpose, participation, leadership capacity, and continuous engagement. When stakeholders see tangible benefits, it becomes easier to build trust. But having the right ambitious one thing, and having the capacity to deliver, it's another. Technology certainly helps, but success still depends on people. We keep on evolving. We used to ask, are we compliant? And then, are we responsible? And now society is asking, can we trust you? Can you contribute positively? Can we partner together? And I like to think about ESG through three simple questions. The first one is, are you a good neighbor? And this is about doing things right, following the rules, minimizing impacts, engaging with stakeholders, and making sure your activities do not harm people or the environment. And many organizations, they begin their ESG journey here. It's very important, but it's also the minimum expectation. And then the second question is, are you a responsible corporate citizen? And here organizations move beyond compliance. They strengthen governance, improve transparency, build accountability. And at this stage, we begin to understand that trust is not a communication issue, it's a governance outcome. But the most important question is this: are you a trusted partner in society? And this is where I see ESG becoming strategic. Organizations begin to think about how they contribute to long-term outcomes in society, how they create value, support economic development, protect the environment, and build meaningful relationships with stakeholders. At this level, companies are not simply managing impacts, they are co-creating solutions with society. And that requires a different mindset, moving from communication to understanding and engagement, from consultation to meaningful participation, and from compliance to contribution. Our goal as industries should not simply be a good neighbor, but to become a trusted partner in society. And you may ask, how can leaders measure whether their organization is a trusted partner? And it's a very good governance question. Trust is usually visible through indicators such as stakeholder engagement, quality, the absence of persistent conflicts, the quality of relationships and reputation. And many organizations measure this through perception surveys and feedback mechanisms. When we talk about governance, many people immediately think about compliance, following the rules, meeting legal requirements, making sure the organization is doing what it's supposed to do. And that's important, but as I said, it's no longer enough. Good governance is also about asking better questions before making decisions. What could happen in 5 years? Who could be affected? What risks are we not seeing yet? How will this decision affect trust? That's what I mean by responsible governance. It's not just about making the right decisions, it's about making decisions in the right way with the right information and thinking about the long-term consequences. And AI makes this even more important. AI gives us an incredible opportunity. It can help us identify risks earlier, improve decision-making, and make organizations more efficient. But it also brings new governance questions. How do we deal with bias? Who's accountable when AI gets it wrong? How transparent should AI decisions be? What happened to jobs? How do we protect privacy and human rights? These aren't technology questions, they are governance questions. And that's why I believe AI doesn't reduce the importance of governance. It makes governance even more important. Let's talk about stakeholders. I know if I ask you to list your organization stakeholders, I'm sure you can do it very quickly. Employees, customers, communities, investors, regulators, suppliers, NGOs. But the harder question is, which stakeholders really have the power to influence your organization's success? Because power doesn't always come from authority. Sometimes it comes from influence, sometimes from credibility, sometimes from public opinion, and sometimes from the ability to delay, disrupt, or shape decisions. Again, an example from mining. A community or an NGO, they can't issue or cancel a permit, but they can influence public opinion, they can influence politicians, they can influence investors, and sometimes social media or faith-based organizations in certain place, they can amplify the influence. And then what started as a relationship issue becomes a business issue. And this is where AI becomes really interesting. In the past, organizations listened from time to time, a survey, a town hall, a complaint, maybe once a year or twice a year. And today we can listen continuously. AI can monitor sentiment, identify patterns, highlight emerging concerns, give us early warnings. But here's the important part. Hearing more doesn't necessarily mean understanding more. AI helps organizations hear, but people still need to listen and interpret. They need to ask why. They need to understand what is really driving the concern. Because the goal isn't to convince everyone to agree with us. The goal is to understand concerns and opportunities early, reduce misinformation where it exists, and make better and more transparent decisions. To me, that's good governance and also good risk management. Let's talk about materiality. We hear this word all the time, but what does it really mean? To me, it's quite simple. Materiality is about identifying the issues that can really affect your organization, not just today, but also in the future. It helps answer questions like what keeps our stakeholders awake at night? What could affect our reputation? What could interrupt operations? What could influence access to capital? If your materiality assessment ends up in a report and never comes back to the boardroom, then I would question how useful it really is. A good materiality assessment should influence strategy. It should influence risk discussions and investment decisions. And it should evolve as the world changes. For example, if you're buying or selling an asset, due diligence today goes well beyond technical or financial side. People also look at legacy issues, relationships, reputation, outstanding conflicts, because those things don't always disappear when ownership changes. And I remember one case where a large mining company sold an exploration project in Central America, and years later, the new owner became involved in a human rights lawsuit. And although the original company was no longer operating the project and was ultimately cleared of any responsibility, its name became associated with the lawsuit. And some organizations became reluctant to work with them simply because of that association. That's a good reminder that governance risks don't always end at the closing of a transaction. And I think AI is going to change materiality as well. Now, AI gives us the opportunity to monitor issues continuously. And instead of asking what what mattered last year, we can start asking what's emerging today. What are we missing? And perhaps most importantly, what risks are still not showing on our radar? And once we identify what really matters, the next question is, what are we going to do about it? And that's where management comes in. And for me, good risk management isn't just about creating a risk register. It's about making sure the organization is paying attention to the right things at the right time and taking action before small issues become big problems. I think we've also seen an evolution in risk management. Years ago, many organizations were mainly reactive. Something happened and then we responded. And over time became more preventive. We introduced controls, policies, audits, and monitoring. And now AI is helping us to be more predictive. And instead of waiting for something to happen, we can start identifying patterns and weak signals much earlier. Maybe a change in employee sentiment, maybe a supplier issue or a cybersecurity concern, or a change in customer behavior. The actual risks will be different depending on where you operate and which industry. When I spoke recently to a Caribbean audience, we talk about hurricanes shutting down ports, airports, or tourism infrastructure. We also discussed how energy instability can affect industrial operations and supply chains, and how water scarcity can impact agriculture or local communities. And in another industry or country, the priorities can be different, but the principle is the same. AI can help us to see those patterns much sooner. And prediction is only valuable if somebody acts on it. Because organizations that perform best aren't necessarily the ones that face fewer risks. They are the ones that see them sooner and adapt faster. Because the goal isn't to predict everything, it's to be prepared and avoid being surprised. And this is probably one of the most important ideas I would like to leave with you today. Many hard risks start as a soft risk. Think about it. Very few crises happen overnight. Usually there are early signals. An employee raises a concern, a customer starts complaining, someone questions an ethical decision, and at first they might seem like small issues, but if nobody pays attention, they can become operational disruptions, legal disputes, reputational damage, financial loss, or even the cancellation of a project. I've seen this happen more than once. The problem wasn't that people didn't know. The problem was that nobody connected the dots early enough. And this is where AI can really help. It can, as I mentioned before, identify patterns, detect trends, highlight issues that deserve attention. But still, people need to take action on what matters. And from a governance perspective, the board needs to confirm with the executives to make sure the organization is listening, asking the right questions, and not ignoring those early warning signs. Because once a soft risk becomes a hard risk, your options become much more limited. This slide summarizes how I see ESG not as a report, not as a department, but as a way of thinking. What really matters? What could affect your organization? What could affect your stakeholders? Where are the biggest risks and opportunities? That's where materiality comes in. Once we understand what matters, we need to decide what we're going to do about it. and that's strategy. Then comes risk management. How do we reduce uncertainty? How do we prepare for what could go wrong? And how do we make sure someone is accountable? And after that, we measure, because if we don't measure it, we can't really know where we are improving. And finally, we communicate, but not just because regulations require it, but because transparency helps build trust. And to me, that's the logic of ESG, one step naturally leading to the next. And this is also where AI becomes a powerful tool, because it might help identify safety incidents, fraud, supply chain disruptions, changing customer expectations, employee dissatisfaction much earlier than we could do before. AI can make every step stronger. It can help us understand faster, but it doesn't decide what matters. This is still our job. Your stakeholders are constantly giving you information. Employees, customers, suppliers, investors. Sometimes they are raising concerns. Sometimes they are sharing ideas. Sometimes they are warning you about something that hasn't shown up on your dashboard yet. And the question is, are we listening? Because when organizations capture those signals early, they can solve problems before they become risks. And just as importantly, they can identify opportunities that they might miss otherwise. And that's why I think feedback systems matter. Good feedback systems also help us understand what's really driving an issue. Very often, the complaint isn't the problem, it's a symptom of something else. Feedback can build trust. People don't expect organizations to have all the answers, but they do expect to be heard. So for me, a good feedback system isn't just about communication. It's about turning stakeholder voices into better decisions. And that's good governance. Let's look at feedback systems in more detail as a little taste for the potential upcoming micro-credential courses that Brock mentioned. And here is a real example. This comes from a mining company in Peru that introduced a community response mechanism after a 5-day strike that became very costly. When they looked back, they realized the strike hadn't appeared overnight. There had been early signs, but they weren't being captured or managed in a systematic way. So they created a very simple feedback system. Nothing sophisticated, just an Excel spreadsheet. Every concern raised by the community was recorded, assigned to someone, tracked, and followed until it was resolved, or, if necessary, kept under ongoing monitoring. The idea was very simple. Don't wait for a problem to become a crisis. Capture early, understand what's behind it, and deal with it before it affects operations. And today, AI can make these systems much more powerful, but the principle hasn't changed. Listen early, respond early, and learn continuously. This slide shows some of the best practices in feedback systems. The picture is from a mining project in a very remote area of Peru, about 5,000 meters above sea level. And the example I'm sharing is from a nearby area where before the construction of a mine, there were only 2 small communities with fewer than 1,000 people. When the construction started, the workforce grew from a few hundred to around 12,000 people for 2 years, There were more than 10 contractor companies working at the site. Can you imagine how much change happened almost overnight? Construction is probably the busiest and most complex phase of a mining project. There are more people, more expectations, more contractors, and more opportunities for things to go wrong. And that's why it's important to implement a strong feedback system right from the beginning. And communities need to be trained on how to use it. It needs to be easy to access. For example, it's common for organizations to set a presence in the nearby town or regular visits to the operations. People need to know what to expect, where to go, how concerns would be handled, how long it would take to receive a response, and what the possible outcomes would be. It's important that the process is easy to access, transparent, and consistent so people trust that their concerns will be heard. And this isn't that data from one specific company. I created these slides some time ago to show the kind of information a good feedback system can generate over time. The chart on the right simply shows where concerns are coming from. And in this example, as you expected, most of the complaints come from the communities that were closest to the operation. Now, what I find really interesting is not the numbers themselves, it's what they tell us. For example, the biggest category is in one of the mines was payments. And at first, you might think the company wasn't paying local suppliers on time. But when they looked more closely, they found something very different. Most delays were happening because the forms were being completed incorrectly. So instead of changing the payment system, all they had to do was offer simple training on how to fill up the forms properly. And the result was that the complaints disappeared. And to me, that's a great example of why it's important to understand the root cause before jumping to solutions. And then if we look at the food example, it might sound like a small operational issue, but this was actually the issue that triggered the expensive 5-day strike a mine suffered, which I mentioned earlier. The story was during the construction of a mine with more than a dozen contractors, a new contractor started providing 3 meals a day to its workers, while the other contractors only offer 2 meals a day. And very quickly, everyone else expected the same treatment. And what looked like a food issue was really a question of perception of fairness. People didn't feel they were being treated equally. And very often the complaint isn't about the problem. It's a signal that something deeper is happening. And if we capture those signals early, we have much better chance of solving the real problem before it becomes an operational disruption, as it was the case of the food issue here. And to me, that's one of the reasons why feedback systems are so valuable. The cost of listening is usually much lower than the cost of not listening. Here's another example of how feedback data can be used. We are looking at complaints by contractor company. During construction, again, it's very common to have several contractors working on the same project. And if you look at the total number of complaints, you know there's a problem, but you don't know where it's coming from. And this type of analysis help answer that question. You can see which contractor is generating the most concerns and, more importantly, what those concerns are about. And that allows management to have a much more productive conversation. So instead of saying we are receiving a lot of complaints, they can say these are the issues we are seeing, and this is where we need to improve. And the same approach can be used in any organization. In fact, instead of contractors, it could be departments, business units, suppliers, or even geographic regions. When you combine what the concern is with where it's coming from, it becomes much easier to understand the root cause and take action before the issues grows. And to me, that's what governance or good governance is about, using information to make better decisions, not just collecting data. This is another way feedback systems can support decision making. Here, we are not just looking at the number of concerns, we are looking at their status, which ones have been resolved, which ones are still open, and which ones need ongoing monitoring. When you combine this with your stakeholder analysis, you can also prioritize your response. Not every issue has the same level of urgency, and not every stakeholder has the same level of influence. And that helps leadership decide where to focus their attention first. And if I may share an example from my own experience, when I became Chief Sustainability Officer for a mining company, I was building ESG function from scratch. We were introducing new policies for ESG and improving human resources standards. So I knew there would be different opinions and probably some resistance. But instead of waiting for concerns to come to me, I decided to meet every month with vice presidents, the executive team, and the general managers from each operation. And the purpose was not to convince them of what I was trying to do, but to listen. I wanted to understand what was working, what wasn't, what concerns they had, and what support they needed. And some of my colleagues and the CEO as well, they thought it was a very bold move, and they felt I was opening a Pandora box for criticism. And funnily enough, the opposite happened. People appreciated being asked. They felt heard. The conversations became more constructive, and over time, their engagement with ESG and human resources grew significantly. And to me, that was another reminder that feedback systems aren't just for external stakeholders. They're just as valuable inside the organization. Everything I've shown you in the last few slides was done before AI became part of our daily lives. Now imagine what these systems can do today. AI can read thousands of comments in seconds. It can identify patterns we might miss, can detect emerging issues much earlier. And with the agentic AI, we are starting to see systems that don't just analyze information. They also recommend actions and automate parts of the response. I think that's incredibly exciting. It gives organizations opportunities to become more proactive, more informed, and hopefully make better decisions as well. But here's the part I think it's most important. AI may be able to help us understand people better, but it can't build relationships for us. It can't earn trust. It can't make ethical decisions. So perhaps the future of ESG in the age of AI becomes even more human. Technology will continue to evolve, and our responsibility as leaders will be to make sure we use it wisely. And finally, as we come to the end, let me leave you with a few reflections. So to me, ESG is really about understanding risks before they become problems, especially the ones that don't show up in financial reports until it's too late. For boards and executives, this is really about governance. It's about making better decisions, asking better questions, and anticipating risks before they affect operations, reputations, or enterprise value. One thing I've learned over the years is that many operational or financial risks begin as people issues. Trust, relationships, communication, perceptions, these are often the first signals that something needs attention. That's why listening matters. AI can certainly help us to do many things better, but I don't think AI replaces the human element. If anything, I think it makes it even more valuable. The ability to bring people together, share a purpose, collaborate, and solve difficult problems. Those may become some of the most important leadership skills in the years ahead. I'm sure many of us are preparing to watch England against Argentina soon, but before that, and before we open to the questions, I just want to say that these are simply some reflections from my own journey. I certainly don't have all the answers, and I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences. So if not today, please connect with me in the future. Thank you very much. I pass on to Kim and Brock now.
Thank you, Chafika. Great presentation. I just want to open it up to ask the audience if anybody has any questions. You can type your question into the chat, and either we'll read that out for Chafika or she'll read it and address your question. So we'll just take a few minutes to let you formulate your questions. Again, please put them in the chat. Questions or comments, any feedback you wish to share is welcome.
We have a question from Paul Ball in the Q&A section.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Yeah, we've got a comment here from Patrice. Thank you for the well thought out presentation. Paul Dubal asks, well, he comments, fabulous session. I love listening to your wisdom. Where do you think, or here's his question, where do you think AI can be used to support our leaders' development in the future?
That's a great question. Thanks, Paul. Good hearing from you. And there's so many things and so much creativity that we can add. And for one thing, it's for certain. I think we are using already. Before AI, we were using technology to train our leaders, and we will now certainly improve the trainings that we can do with leaders through AI, but I do believe that the human thing and the exchange, especially with the things that I'm bringing up that, in my opinion, will be important, which is the human element. I think it's important to keep certain aspects of training to the human level as well. Otherwise, I think we risk to lose authenticity as well. I think it's very important for people and organizations to be very careful and cautious not to lose their authenticity. And if we just rely on artificial intelligence, that's a big risk to consider.
Great. We've got a few other questions here. So this one, they're noted as anonymous, so I don't have their name. How does culture impact this approach that you discussed today? That could be organizational or potentially, beyond that.
And it's an interesting question, and I think it relates very much to what I just mentioned about authenticity, because even when I think about the mining industry, which I am most familiar with, companies, even though they abide to similar standards and procedures and best practice, they tend to have at least slightly different cultures, and the difference in cultures are exactly pointed to the authenticity they have, the experience they bring, the different leadership they might have, where they put their focus on, and again, I think culture and artificial intelligence, even though it can help us with everything, making it faster, more efficient, it's very important to keep authenticity, and authenticity will be kept when we keep putting importance on the human element.
Got a few more questions here. So this one is from an anonymous attendee as well. There is always a tension of what is governance versus what is operational. How can a board get past the AI implementation as operational and get into a framework of good governance with respect to AI? Are there any legislative or regulatory resources available for boards?
I'm not aware of regulatory requirements for board. I'm sure it's coming. And I think right now there's a lot of questions as well from the boards. There's so much more required from them right now. And I think organizations are likely being very cautious on using and allowing their workforce to make use of AI until they feel they are in control, because that's the thing, right? It's like can you make use of AI and still be in control? And you hear stories of, I heard a story where AI deleted a full data set from a company, and if you use AI at any time and you point it out to their mistakes, it's always like, oops, yes, you're right. So I know there's a lot of questions. I don't know how long it's going to take for us to have the answers. And I'm sure boards are paying a lot of attention, and executives as well. And there's a lot of concern, and at the same time, action towards, like, okay, what is it that we can use that does not affect us being in control of the important decisions?
Yes, absolutely. In terms of resources, I think, what we're planning on at CGIC is additional education opportunities related to this topic. So I think, that's one area that everybody can look out for. So stay tuned for updates on that. We've got quite a few more questions here. Sustainability reporting is gradually becoming a norm, especially with IFRS. What controls do you advise to prevent overstatements?
Yeah, and there's been so many changes since the companies starting adopting more and more sustainability reports, and mining as an industry, sustainability reports has been going on for many years now, and it's been changing it as well. As now, we don't need to print them anymore, and you can put different links into your website to the reports. One thing that I think it's very important for sustainability reports to remain or become more relevant is the language. I know it's a challenge to make the language accessible for different audience, but what I see sometimes is that sometimes we write sustainability reports just for our peers We just, we understand each other. We talk about it, we discuss it, but is it really getting to the audiences that we want to? Do we know which audiences we wanted to get to? And, again, that's where materiality assessment is very important. Where, what do you want from your sustainability report? Or more importantly, what your stakeholders want, right? So the materiality assessment should define what is it that your stakeholders want to hear about, where their concerns are, where their curiosities are, and which ones should we be responding to as well.
We've got another question here from Karina Rosales. She says, "Thank you for the excellent presentation." Her question is, in your view, what are the key elements of AI governance that not only help mitigate risk, but also foster a net positive mindset?
Ooh, this is a very, I think I'm going to hold to that question, Brock. Let's make a note of that question because the answer is a full
Full
course
presentation.
a full course for our micro credential upcoming potential courses that we are discussing.
Absolutely.
It's a great question. Thank you very much. But I think the answer, demands a lot of thinking and organizing thoughts and ideas, and also, what is the capacity of AI in that sense. So
Yes.
I'll keep that answer to respond in our next courses.
Great. And just so stay tuned, Karina, and you'll get a full session on that topic in the future. What do you recommend when the volume or complexity of AI-generated information makes it difficult for humans to verify the source data? Ooh, that's a juicy one too.
And also it's like it's very difficult to think in such general term because it depends on what you're talking about, right? For instance, if you're just talking about data collected from a community regarding their perception of the mining activities, right? But again, this is another question that it could be included in the same course, Brock, because those are very difficult questions to answer without giving the proper attention and testing it as well.
Absolutely. This one's a pretty hands-on practical question. So AI tools and note takers are now being used more frequently by boards and corporate secretaries to take notes, summarize board meeting discussions, and generate minutes. In your view, Chafika, what are the risks and benefits of using these AI tools from a board governance and corporate secretary standpoint?
Yeah, and I've seen those as well, and whatever you use AI for, it's like you need to read what it's providing you with a lot of attention because if you use AI, you know how many times AI is going to say, "Oh, oops, you're right. Oh, good catch." Like, okay, I give you a small example. I'm going to be watching the soccer or football for Europeans, Argentina versus England, and I was looking for a place to go to with my friends, and one of the answers was like, "Oh yeah, the game is at 3 p.m. and I know the game is at 2 p.m. where I am," and then I said something like, you meant 2 p.m. And then AI says, "Oh, good catch. Yes, 2 p.m." Right? So, you need to read and about specifically about this question on the summarizing meetings and action items. I don't think if I was in charge of the meeting, I wouldn't let AI circulate before I look at it. I put my voice on it really look at what it's important, because there might be, in a meeting, there are so many things said, and not all actions are important enough to be in the summary. So I would be very cautious on this, and I think, not let it be in control. You should be in control.
Yeah, the other thing to just add in on that is, especially in a virtual meeting, the AI, there's technology limitations, right? Where the AI might miss part of the conversation, maybe somebody's audio cuts out, something like that. So it is important to check. We've got a couple more questions. We'll try to squeeze these in before we wrap up. So, William Holmes, excellent presentation. Here's his question, Chafika. How do you best guard against over-reliance on AI for decision making? It's the first part. What do you see as the biggest risk associated with using AI for companies in the future?
Yeah, and thank you, Bill. Lovely to hear from you. And then again, it's about the human element and being in control. Making decisions. So which decisions should we allow AI to make, if we do, and make the hard questions. What are the risks that they make the wrong decisions? What if it makes the wrong decision? So there's many questions we need to be asking about. And again, I think the human element is going to be one of the most important strategic elements that we can have for organizations, and making sure we keep things under our control.
Yes. So really, to emphasize, AI is a tool. Humans are still important, which you've said throughout your presentation. I'm gonna get one more question in here before we wrap up. There's still a few more, but we've come to the end of our time. So this will be the final question for today, and we can share the questions with Chafika, and she can respond after the session. This question is, do you have a view on what tools a board can use to measure accountability and alignment of culture?
I think, the best tool that the board has, and that's why it's important to have a very diversified board, because a diversified board, and I mean by, gender, age, experiences, they bring different experiences and, aspects. So they will be asking different questions. I think the best tool for the board is not a tool, it's their human element, because it's going to depend on what questions do they ask. Of course, AI might help, like before a board meeting, they might go to AI and ask, okay, what questions can I ask about this subject or the other subject? But then again, organizations are being very cautious on what can they feed AI with, because of confidentiality, for instance, right? So there are several elements, but I think the best thing that the board can bring is their human element and their diversity.
Absolutely. Well, we've got a couple more questions, but we're going to have to wrap up there for today as we're at time. I want to thank you very much for everybody that attended. Please complete the survey at the end that'll pop up in your browser. That will really help inform our decision making on future CPD sessions like this one, as well as additional education opportunities that we are looking at in the future. And I want to just close by saying thank you very much, Chafika. That was a wonderful presentation, very informative and engaging. Take care, everybody. See you next time.
Yeah, cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.